Welcome back. In my previous lesson, I told you how you can get started creating a Concierge MVP by deciding what your value proposition is, coming up with a hypothesis for who your early adopter may be, and finally coming up with a brief description of the experience that someone will go through. Throughout all the past lessons, I've been telling you that a Concierge MVP is, after all, an experience, and you're running an experiment. One part of running an experiment is to take measurements. Measurements can be used as indicators. We can infer whether or not an experiment was a success or a failure by using the measurements. The measurements will let us make an educated guess of what it is that we did successfully or failed at, and then what to do next. Now, in this final lesson, I'll be providing you with some examples of what it is you should be measuring as you offer your Concierge MVP to your early adopters. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's really just meant to give you an idea of the types of measurements you may want to take to determine if your Concierge MVP is a success or a failure. Now keep in mind, in either of these cases, you can use the data to improve the Concierge MVP and run the experiment again. Now the first thing you want to measure is a customer's interest. You can measure that by the number of people who sign up to try out your Concierge MVP. If you find that not too many people are signing up, then it's possible that either they aren't interested in the value proposition or you aren't going after the right type of early adopter. However, if you see that there are a significant number of signups, then the next measurement you want to take is based on engagement. Now, it's not enough for people to just sign up and try out your Concierge MVP. They need to go through the entire experience. And while your Concierge MVP may be one that can either be experienced once or multiple times, you want to measure each experience individually. You can do this by surveying your customers after their first experience and then each subsequent time. You'll want to find out on a scale of 1 to 10 whether they love or hate your Concierge MVP. If it's neither, then it's very likely that they're apathetic about the Concierge MVP, which is actually a sign of disinterest. If people are disinterested, you'll have to go back to figuring out what the value proposition is, and if you're targeting the right early adopter segment. If instead they swing to the extremes, you can go on to taking the third and final measurement, especially in the case where people may hate the Concierge MVP. The final measurement is to gauge what needs to be improved in order to retain the customer. This comes down to surveying the customer and then finding the patterns in the surveys amongst the customers. Focus on what you uncover as commonalities and use that to refine your Concierge MVP before you test it again on another set of customers. Okay, that's it for all my lessons on Concierge MVP. So now we're going to recap. Remember, we started by talking about why so many Concierge MVPs fail. Then we talked about how a Concierge MVP is a great way to test an idea, especially if you have a limited number of resources. And then I went on to mention why it's important for both technical and non-technical founders to create a Concierge MVP. After that, I talked a little bit about some successful ones and then showed you how you can get started building your own. And in this final lesson, we've talked about measurements you can take to determine how effective your Concierge MVP is. Now, one last parting point. No matter whether or not your Concierge MVP is a wild success or a horrible failure, you will need to iterate and refine it. The reason being, you cannot scale a business long-term with just a Concierge MVP. Remember, the main goal of a Concierge MVP is twofold. The first is to test the value proposition amongst a group of early adopters. And the second is to make sure you know who your early adopters are. So I'm going to wish you the best of luck getting out there and testing out your Concierge MVP. And once you do, I'd love for you to share your Concierge MVP results with me. Just tweet @Femgineer. Thanks a lot.